Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I encourage you to hit that like button, to subscribe for more quality content, and to share with your friends. I also encourage you to check out the playlist tab for more videos and to check out my books. I will put the link in the description to my author page. I hope that you'll check that out and check out my other videos as well. Today, I would like to do a discussion or talk on the notion of ideological boundaries. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So what is ideology? It's something that I often implicitly reference in my philosophy, whether in my writing or in the way that I analyze philosophy on my YouTube channel and the way that I analyze ideas. I would, to keep the notion of and definition of ideology as simple as it can be, I would describe it as ideas or beliefs that you can't question. And so ideological boundaries would be an ideology that separates us from other possibilities. So an example of this is dogma in any kind of field of inquiry or study, where the dogma cannot be questioned, where people place a certain boundary about the questions that can be asked and about the things that you can explore. And so in that way, ideological boundaries are put into place and they actually limit or stunt inquiry and stunt curiosity and exploration. Now, in my estimation, we live in a gray world. We live in a world where there are actually not boundaries, at least looking at it from a metaphysical perspective. We live in a world where everything is ambiguous. So for example, the universe doesn't care if it basically just threw a comet into your planet, so to speak, or an asteroid. And of course that's an exaggeration, but you get the idea. The universe is not worried about cutting things into parts. I actually think that this idea of cutting things into parts is a very human notion, and it arises from humanity, I believe, and from individuals. And I think a lot of this is because we want to establish order in a world that is very fluid and ambiguous and unclear and not clear-cut. And so that can definitely be difficult to live in a world that is gray, and to live in a world where there aren't really black and white delineations, and where we do have to acknowledge that we have a tendency to separate things from ourselves and from our groups and from our ideologies and ideas. And it's very difficult to get by in a gray world without having some kind of ideological boundary. I myself do not want to be ideological about ideology, so to speak. I don't want to have ideological boundaries about ideological boundaries. And I in fact want to empathize with the reason why we establish these boundaries in the first place. It is because life is confusing, because life is difficult, because life is painful, because there is chaos. Today of all days, there is a high wind warning in Salt Lake City, and it's been knocking over branches and power lines, and it's been creating chaos. And this is why we have ideological boundaries, because we have to get by in a world that seemingly doesn't care. And perhaps that chaos is a metaphor for a lack of an ideology, or for something that exists whether we like it or not. So I do think that ideologies can be good for ordering the world, for giving some kind of understanding of things, and I think in that way we do need ideologies to a degree. But when I talk about ideologies, I have a more negative view of it, because I often think that ideological boundaries that we put into place prevent us from doing things that I think are very valuable, such as exploring the world, such as exploring concepts and ideas, such as expressing ourselves, such as having hard conversations with people that don't agree with us, such as experiencing the world in an open-ended and open and free way. And it is a difficult thing to keep in mind that we do hold ourselves back from exploring things and from seeing what is really out there. I think science, the scientific view and the scientific method, is a good way of looking at this perspective, in that the goal is not to allow ourselves to close off ideas. It is to present theories and to be able to try to test them in the world and to see what is actually true. And so the spirit of science is often one of skepticism, and I think of philosophy as well. It's of skepticism and this desire to question things, to probe deeper, to ask deeper questions. And so in this way, we try to keep an open-ended spirit and an open-minded attitude. And I think that that is definitely a very valuable thing. But I do think that it is hard, as an example, to be scientific or philosophical because, as I've said earlier, we want that order. We want to be able to impose our views. We want to be able to impose our vision of what the world is and what it needs to be. And I find this view to be very limiting. I often find these elements in a variety of ways of approaching the world, whether religious or political, sometimes even scientific if you're utilizing scientism or an excess reductionism or too much materialism. Like, we definitely limit our views. And I've realized through time that I myself, who likes to be open to the world and open to new ideas, still nonetheless partitions the world. I cut things up into parts. I stop questioning things. I fall for confirmation bias, where I only want to confirm my views and I only want to confirm what I want to believe, and so I look for evidence that confirms that view rather than looking at the bigger picture. So believe me, I get that it is very hard to not be ideological, and a lot of it is sometimes not even necessarily because we don't want to be open, but because, as I said earlier, life is a very difficult thing, and sometimes we don't know how to address life. Now, one of the reasons why I think that ideological boundaries are problematic is because they don't allow us to question things and explore, and part of that means we end up pushing our views on other people, and what's even worse about this is sometimes those views aren't even correct. And why should we push our morality, our view of the world, our philosophy, our ideas on people who may have a completely different perspective, and how that's okay? I do understand that there are problems with the notion of pluralism, one of which is the notion that there are issues with having too many differing points of view because often they contrast each other in sharp ways, often they limit other views, often they push against other views, often they're antagonistic to views that are not their own. And certainly that is a very difficult thing. And I don't like that element of basically pushing our views. I do understand why we push some views, because we're trying to convince people, because we want people to be like-minded with us, because we want to be able to convey things that they agree with. But in all honesty, it is much more complicated in life and in the world. Like I said, there are really not boundaries in the world, and often there are a lot of things that are difficult to even understand because they are so fluid. And so we certainly have to keep this in mind. One of the reasons why I identified science as a potential way of viewing the world is because part of what you get in science is a skepticism towards your own ideas, a skepticism towards even proving ideas or proving your own ideas. And I think that there is a lot of value in allowing for there to be uncertainty, in allowing a view that you admit you don't know, in allowing a view that is incomplete, allowing a view that is difficult to accept, I would say. And I think that all of that is very valuable and important. Now, my idea, just to be clear, is not dogmatic. I would be contradicting myself if I said, no ideological boundaries ever. Like, I certainly don't want to do that, because I don't want to be dogmatic, I don't want to be ideological, and I'm not saying that this is a universal. It's not as if science or philosophy or any field of knowledge is the only view of the world. It's not as if that is all that we ever experience or see. And so we have to keep that in mind, that the universals that we want to make from our own beliefs do not have to be everything. And so I'm okay with uncertainty. I'm okay with not knowing. I'm okay with people rejecting my idea of ideological boundaries and doing our best to not carve up the world so much into so many parts, to allow for curiosity, to allow for exploration. And I think that it is very valuable to not have a dogmatic point of view in this way, whether about ideological boundaries or something else. I think that really for me, I just want to explore the world on my own terms. Certainly, this doesn't mean that I wouldn't consider morality as part of the picture. I'm not just saying that we do whatever we want. Actually, speaking of science, one of the problems with science is they don't always respect certain ethical principles that we may have. Sometimes it's more important that we find the truth rather than look out for other sentient beings. And I think the atom bomb and the development of the atom bomb is an example of that, where we were more worried about the science of something and not considering the ethical implications of it. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a morality when it comes to understanding our views. I definitely think that we should. Now, I wanted to give a brief analogy to this idea in practice, and it may be a little bit silly of an example, but I think it's an important one. When I want to sit down to read, and when I'm trying to decide what I want to read, I may have a taste, I may have things that I'm interested in, but I would like to look at it as I'm very curious, and so I'm willing to read basically anything that crosses my path. It doesn't mean I will always like what I read that crosses my path. It doesn't mean I will always enjoy it, but the idea is to see language and words and ideas as being fluid and open-ended, and there's no reason why we need to limit ourselves and the text that we engage in. It's the same with music. Why not like 20 different genres of music? Why not like metal but also like pop music? Why not like, country music on top of that, Like, why limit ourselves? And I understand that part of the reason why we do limit ourselves in this case is because we do have tastes, we have things that we're interested in, things that we would rather engage with. But part of the idea is to allow our exploration of the world, in this case art, and literature and philosophy and various things that we read and take part in, we want that to be open-ended. We want it to be fluid. And I think that there is definitely a lot of value in that. And I do think that this is very important when analyzing ideas. We do definitely want to analyze arguments and not just be persuaded by everything and not just take whatever comes our way. Because as they say, that's, if your mind's too open, then your brains fall out, as they say. But the idea is certainly to have the openness to different arguments, to differing points of view, to see things in a variety of ways, to not shut down ideas that are different from our own. I think this is really important. And the reason why I do use the term ideological boundary specifically is because I do think that we place these limits whenever we are analyzing ideas, whenever we are listening to music or reading a book, as examples, or even whenever we're engaging with people. We don't like views that are different from our own. And again, while I understand the evolutionary perspective of why this is the case, with tribalism and various group mentalities as an example, I don't think that it is the most free-spirited way of going about the world. I think that there are ways that we can be much more open. So yeah, I'm Phoenix, and I hope that you enjoyed this talk. I hope that it gives you some ideas with exploring the world and with thinking about your own point of view, and I hope that you enjoyed it. And yeah, I encourage you to check out my other videos on my channel. I'm very glad that you stopped by today, and there will be much more content to come, so keep a lookout. I'm Phoenix, and thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.